Sapphic and Spiritual, the podcast for queer spirituality, because being queer is a spiritual path, with your host, Harley Phillips. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sapphic and Spiritual. So Mother's Day was celebrated over the weekend here in the US, and I felt inspired to talk about the mother archetype of the triple goddess. As someone who does not have a relationship with her mother, the mother archetype and Mother's Day can feel painful. And unfortunately, for many of us within the queer community, we know the pain of losing a parent or losing a mother. So today we'll talk about the triple goddess, the mother archetype, the mother wound, and the process of reparenting ourselves. Maiden, mother, crone, what does it all mean? And you may be wondering, do you have to be an actual mother to relate with the mother archetype? Does this only apply to those who identify as women? Or can the lesson be more generalized by using more inclusive language? Is this ancient concept even relevant in the modern world? And how does it apply to queer people? Let's get into it. The triple goddess represents an archetypal energy that speaks to the lifespan and its phases. Rooted in paganism and goddess spirituality, the triple goddess is portrayed as one goddess with three distinct aspects that represent phases within life: the maiden, the mother, and the crone. The symbol of the triple goddess is a waxing crescent moon, a full moon, and a waning crescent moon arranged from left to right. These are the parts of the whole life cycle. So we have the first third of our life, the middle third, and the final third. And each aspect has specific characteristics that make up that phase. So there's different lessons and challenges associated with each aspect. And there's even representation within the natural or elemental world in terms of different seasons or different moon phases associated with each distinct part of life. I like to think of the wisdom that can be found within the triple goddess as like an ancient form of developmental psychology. So starting in the late 19th century and gaining momentum from there, we see this rise in curiosity related to life cycles and development. So we see theories introduced like Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development, or Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages of development, all the theories that you probably learned in Psych 101. So understanding the triple goddess is just another approach to gaining insight related to our development and growth. No different than Erikson theorizing that within adolescence, for example, we're likely to experience conflict and challenges and growth related to identity and who we are. The teachings of the triple goddess highlight what to expect during various phases of life. So before we dive into what each phase means, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the problematic piece to this, the wording. So it can be exclusionary and not reflective of everyone's story. By using gender-specific language, it can leave out those who don't identify as a woman. And even for women, how we view what a mother is, for example, it might not feel relatable. Like, I'm 34, I have no kids, but technically I would fall into the mother phase of my life based on my age. But I'm not a mother, so does that mean I'm falling behind? Does that mean something's wrong with me because I don't have kids? What about people who don't want kids, or people who want to have children but struggle with fertility, or for queer couples? Like my wife and I, for example, we're 50-50 about having kids. And a big part of that is honestly accessibility for us to even have a child. All that goes into it, the finances. It's just not possible for everyone. So bearing children or becoming a parent should not be the defining factor of motherhood or adulthood. And despite all of that, it doesn't mean you can't relate to the mother archetype. Just because we hear the word mother and are conditioned to place certain attributes on what that means, like having children, that doesn't mean it's the only thing it can mean. Let's look beyond the obvious black and white of all of it. So we can actually easily exchange maiden, mother, and crone for language that resonates with us and our unique journey. So here's other language you can use, and feel free to play around with any variation of words that feels good for you with this. These are a few I've heard before, and there's also a few I saw on a really great Reddit thread that was called Gender Neutral Equivalents to Maiden, Mother, and Crone. If you want to check it out, I'll link it in the show notes. But here are some other variations of Maiden, Mother, and Crone that you can use. So child, adult, elder, child, guardian, guide, acorn, sapling, oak, initiate, warrior, sage, dawn, day, dusk, student, teacher, elder. And I thought this was funny. Someone on the Reddit thread said tall, grande, venti. So anything goes. Create whatever word you like, whatever resonates with you. So the big piece of this, the gist of it all, is that it's about phases of life, seasons of life. And ultimately, it's as if our life is one book made up of various chapters. So the chunk of today's episode will be about the mother phase of the triple goddess, but let's briefly go over each of the three phases because they are so interconnected. If you go to my website, sapphic-and-spiritual.com, you'll find a PDF that you can download for free under the resources tab, and it lists each phase of the triple goddess and its characteristics if you'd like to revisit and reflect back on this information later. So first we have the maiden, otherwise known as the child, the acorn, the student, the initiate. And when I think of the maiden, my mind always goes right to Disney princesses. The energy of the maiden is one of innocence, of self-discovery, and of new beginnings. The maiden energy is full of excitement and adventure, and because of that, sometimes that goes hand in hand with being a bit naive and learning through trial and error. That's why I always tend to think of Disney princesses with the maiden, because there's this quest for love or for finding yourself when it comes to Disney princesses. And on that journey of figuring out who they are, there's always some kind of danger they run into. But ultimately, those bumps in the road lead them to their destination. So maidens are often associated with virgins, the astrological sign Virgo. Any other Virgos here? I'm a Virgo. Means maiden. So the meaning of the word virgin has actually changed throughout history. There was a time when the word virgin had nothing to do with whether or not someone had sex, but it referred to a woman who was unmarried or of herself. So the time of maidenhood then, with that definition in mind, is a time in life that's all about being of yourself, of learning who you are. And the maiden's moon phase is the waxing crescent moon, and the season associated with the maiden is spring. And I think as queer people, we can relate to that maiden phase. This is the period of life where we're figuring it all out, where we're exploring who it is we actually are deep down. And as someone who fully came out, not just like 1 foot out of the closet, but all the way out at 32, I see coming out as actually this like defining moment that marked my transition from maiden to mother for me. Okay, so next we have the mother archetype, aka the adult, the teacher, the guardian, the warrior. So the mother goes far beyond having a child or being a literal mother. While the maiden journey is towards self-discovery, the mother knows who she is. That doesn't mean she's still not growing and learning, but she's secure in herself. The energy of the mother is both nurturing and protective, and it's also incredibly creative and fertile. So when we're in the mother phase, we're creating, birthing, nurturing ideas, others, projects, relationships. It's bringing to life the essence of who we are after we've experienced the initiation of maidenhood. So it's acting on our creative inspiration and bringing that to life. Creating a life for ourselves, creating a business, creating hobbies, creating a garden, whatever it might be, and then nurturing our creations so that they can reach their full potential and grow. So the mother energy is also protective. So it's going to guide and it's going to look out for what it's bringing to life. And the mother aspect also involves empowering yourself and others, which is really a critical element for the queer community in advocating for rights and visibility and acceptance. The mother's moon phase is the full moon and the season is summer. And then finally we have the crone. And this is the elder, the guide, the sage, the oak. And the crone, has really received a bad rap from the patriarchy because of how powerful the crone actually is. Crone has come to have negative associations that can be kind of portrayed as being old and wicked. And if you think about when I said the Maiden gives me Disney princess vibes, think about how the Disney princess portrayed the crone, right? Like Ursula in The Little Mermaid or Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty. It's the evil old witch who lives hidden from society. She's an outcast. She's dark. Patriarchal society tries to brainwash us into fearing the crone because she's powerful. And what does patriarchy do with powerful women? Well, they try to strip away her power by calling her crazy or evil. And the crone is really the holder of wisdom and embodies this culmination of life experiences. So the crone welcomes change and transitions, and she does so while maintaining this inner tranquility. And as queer people, we know a thing or two about significant transitions, whether related to gender, sexuality, societal roles. The crone's connection to endings and new beginnings, it teaches us acceptance of change and guides us to embrace each phase of our life with wisdom and with dignity. The crone's moon phase is the waning crescent moon, and the season is fall or winter. One thing I do want to stress about the three phases of the triple goddess is that while, yes, we can look at it from a linear chrono-spaced time perspective, we can access elements of these archetypes whenever we need them. So while we might have more access to maiden wisdom, for example, simply because we've spent most of our time in that phase, it's all available to us. There's no rule book with this saying like, okay, so you're maiden from birth to 30, and then mother from 30 to 60, and then crone to 60 to 90. It might organically align like that, but these energies could show up in shorter seasons for all of us as well. You know, it could be like the life cycle of a project you're working on, or an element of your healing journey, for example. There's a definitive beginning, middle, and end to that. So think of the moon with these cycles. The moon repeats its lunar cycle every 29.5 days, right? So the cyclical nature of the triple goddess, it beautifully fits into queerness because to be queer is to embrace fluidity and change. I feel like we receive such signaling at times that change isn't a good thing, when the reality is that change is one of the only things that is truly constant throughout life. When I came out, there were certain people who were like, "You've changed." But the tone of voice was passively aggressively insinuating that the change was a bad thing. But the triple goddess, well, she says change is an initiation into growth. She says change is perfectly normal and part of our existence. I mean, look no further than a butterfly to really embrace the wisdom of change. Like breaking out of the cocoon, that's where the magic happens. So we have a few deities that we can look toward to help us understand the triple goddess. In Celtic traditions, we have the Morrigan, that is seen as a triple goddess, and in Greek mythology, Hecate, who is the goddess of magic, witches, and the crossroads, is depicted with three forms or three faces of the goddess. So I work with Hecate, and let me also say that her name can be pronounced differently. So I say Hecate, but there are many people who say Hecate. I've heard Hecate. So just be aware, there's many pronunciations. But I group Hecate, from my experience of working with her, into this triple goddess equation along with Persephone and Demeter. And I know this isn't everyone's interpretation, but it's how I see it. And here's a bit of background information on Persephone, Demeter, and Hecate, because I feel like exploring their mythology can really help set the stage for these archetypes and how they interact with one another. Okay, so this is long story short, super Cliff Notes version, but we have Persephone, who is the daughter of Demeter. And she is this gorgeous maiden princess. Essentially, she's the goddess of springtime, and she's known for her beauty and lightness and innocence. And one day, she's picking flowers and frolicking in the sun and living her best life, and here comes Hades, god of the underworld. So now this next part of the mythology has various interpretations. Some say Hades captured her and kidnapped her, and others say she went willingly. But Persephone ends up in hell, in the underworld with Hades. I personally choose to believe that she chose to venture into the underworld out of her own free will. That for a goddess of springtime who knows only the light, that the deeper meaning here is that in order to find out who we are, we have to face our darkness or shadows. Now, Demeter, her mother, was completely devastated because she didn't know what happened to her daughter, who just disappeared out of thin air. So Demeter was the goddess of the harvest and fertility, and she was in charge of the crops. So she's often depicted in a wheat field. So Demeter, being a mom, searches the earth far and wide to find Persephone with no luck. And because she's in such a state of grief, she's not taking care of herself. She's not nourishing herself. So as a result, planet Earth is not nourished, and the inhabitants of Earth suffered. Because remember, she's the goddess of agriculture and crops, and her grief was so profound when she couldn't find Persephone that famine spread over the earth, and there were no crops, there was no food. And what a metaphor, right? That when we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. Anyway, then enter in Hecate. So Hecate, who's the goddess of magic and witchcraft and the crossroads, she heard Persephone's screams, and she tells Demeter what she knows and offers to help search for her. So Demeter then gets word from Helios, the god of the sun, that Hades has Persephone in the underworld. So Hecate, who's often seen with torches, ventures into the underworld and becomes a confidant and guide for Persephone in the underworld. Ultimately, the myth ends with Persephone spending 6 months of the year in the underworld and 6 months of the year earthside with her mother, resulting in Persephone becoming both the goddess of the underworld and the goddess of springtime. So full circle here, Persephone begins as the innocent young maiden and throughout this journey becomes the queen of hell, yet still remains goddess of springtime. And this is why I love Persephone so much, because she's like, you can be everything. You can be queen of hell and goddess of springtime. So this myth so perfectly speaks to the nature of the triple goddess for many reasons. The triple goddess is all about embracing and integrating each season of life. The cycle of Persephone's descent into the underworld and her later return represents balance. It represents seasons and birth and transformation. And Demeter, the mother archetype in the story, it's this quintessential mother. As the goddess of the harvest, she represents fertility, abundance, nurturance, and then there's this warrior aspect of her, the I'll stop at nothing to get my daughter back, protector energy. And then we have Hecate, who represents the crone, the wise woman, who holds a torch for Persephone to bring light to her darkness in the underworld. She's the guide. She's the elder who comes to help the mother, Demeter. And she was so in tune with her intuition that she heard the cries of Persephone going into the underworld initially. And somehow I find this myth so incredibly relatable and relevant. It's actually one of my favorites. Remember when I said the triple goddess is in fact one form with 3 phases? Sometimes I like to reflect on this myth from the lens of the different goddesses being just different aspects of one unified self. So if we view Persephone as the maiden, as our inner child, it fits. It's our younger parts. It's our maiden self when they first set out on a journey to self-discovery. Persephone was literally in a field picking flowers when Hades appeared to her. From that moment on, that moment when she chose to go into the underworld, that's a metaphor for shadow work and for facing our inner demons. You know, her life was forever changed. And our journey to embracing our queerness, to coming out, it's no different. We make the brave decision to literally leave behind this false safety of the field of flowers in exchange for the unknowns of hell, all to discover who we really are. And that's when we realize it's walking through the gates of hell that accelerates our transformation. In fact, we have to face hell. We have to face the shadow to come to the other side. And it's completely fucking worth it. And with Hecate being the crone, I love how she's depicted by the torch and crossroads. So Hecate goes into the underworld to help Persephone. She shines light on the shadows with her torch, and I think it speaks to her wisdom as the crone. Meanwhile, Demeter, as the mother, has the whole world going hungry trying to find Persephone, but Hecate knows the only way out is through. She guides Persephone. She doesn't force her out, she guides her. And I think that we can really learn a lot from Hecate's crone energy here. To me, it even speaks to spiritual bypass. While the mother energy of Demeter longed to keep Persephone forever safe and in her own little bubble, Persephone needed to go through the darkness to step into her whole self, to reclaim her identity as both the goddess of springtime and the queen of hell itself. So sometimes we can't just spiritually bypass something or protect parts of ourselves from feeling or experiencing a difficult emotion, because that might be exactly what we need. And that's the beauty of the crone. And when we tune into that, it can be really powerful to help us navigate what energy do we really need at any given moment. Remember, all of these energies are always available to us. So back to the mother. This is where we're going to stay for the rest of the episode, in the realm of the mother. So here in America, Mother's Day was celebrated on Sunday, May 12th. And honestly, Mother's Day, knowing it was approaching, and the inner work I've been doing on stepping into my own mother archetype and that reparenting piece, that's really what inspired me to talk about the triple goddess today. Mother's Day is always a strange day for me, and one that feels like a lot of loss. I grew up without a mom. My mom got pregnant with me her senior year of high school, and then by the time I was in first grade, she was non-existent in my life. She married someone who was incredibly abusive, and because of that, I went to live with my grandparents, which unfortunately was not the fairy tale ending either, but it did get me out of the domestic violence. And here and there over the years, we'd try to reconnect, but it never went well, to say the least. And it's been, I think going on 10 years now, since I've spoken to her. And my grandmother, who raised me, I mean, she did the best she could, but she had her fair amount of trauma and just a lot of unhealed wounds, and never really filled those mother shoes, because honestly, she just didn't have the capacity. And then when I came out to them, they stopped talking to me. So that was another mother betrayal. And growing up, I had an aunt who always felt like my saving grace. She was like a mother figure and a sister figure, kind of all in one. And she was the one who was warm and nurturing and kind to me when I was a kid. And she actually died of appendix cancer when I was 26. And she was only 45. So by this point, I just felt like any mother figure I had in my life, they left me. And I felt motherless as a result. And so, of course, this left me with a massive mother wound. When we're betrayed or abandoned by our mothers, we betray and abandon ourselves. So if this is the first time you're hearing the term mother wound, here's a quick rundown. The mother wound is exactly what it sounds like. It's a wounding that we experience when we lack the mothering that we needed to thrive. There's three main components to a mother wound. Kelly McDaniel talks about this in her book, Mother Hunger, and she says those three elements are nurturance, protection, and guidance. So when we lack nurturance, protection, and guidance in our childhood or in our maidenhood, we develop a mother wound. And how does a mother wound present itself? Well, it can look like perfectionism, codependency, addiction, people-pleasing, poor self-esteem, poor boundaries, etc., etc. Also, a really great resource for this, because there's so much here. My friend and teacher, Christina Wiltsey, on her podcast, The Spiritual Fix, there's an entire season 3. It's dedicated to the mother wound. So if you're interested in learning more about this work, that's a really good place to start. And speaking of my friend Christina, a few years ago when I started my mother wound work, I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, "Motherless daughters were meant for a greater mother." And God, that hit me so deeply, because that's where we're going with all of this now, of how we access and lean into the greater mother, the great mother herself, or our inner mother, the reparenting part of this equation. Because when we grow up without a mother, when we lose our mother or mother figure, when we're abused by our mother or not accepted, we miss out on the nurturance, protection, and guidance we need. And later on in life, we have to learn how to source that internally and to reparent ourselves to be the mother we needed. Reparenting is really just giving to ourselves what we weren't given. So it's recognizing when we're triggered by something and developing a relationship with that younger part of ourselves to be able to stop ourselves when we do become triggered and offer the nurturance, protection, and guidance to those parts that we didn't get when we were kids. For me, I find it helpful to literally ask myself when I get triggered and I know it's a trauma response. I'll say, kind of taking it back to that nurturance, protection, and guidance, what one of those three things do I need? Could I nurture myself? Do I need some self-care? Do I need some coping skills? Do I need protection? Am I letting others cross my boundaries? Am I feeling energetically depleted? Or do I need guidance? Should I meditate and listen to my inner wisdom? Do I talk to my wife? Do I call my best friend? Far too many of us within the LGBTQ community have a mother wound. And I know this doesn't apply to everyone. My mother-in-law, my wife's mom, she has been nothing but supportive and kind and nurturing. She's the mom who's wearing the free mom hugs shirt at Pride events, and she's the best. She's great. But that's not everyone's experience. If you're like me and you don't have a supportive mother, or you've been abandoned by your mother, or maybe you've lost your mother, that pain is deep. Many of us didn't have the Demeter type mother Persephone had, who literally searched every corner of the earth for her daughter. Or maybe it's that we didn't have the elder wisdom of Hecate showing up with a torch to guide us out of the darkness when we need it. Growing up without a mother and a father, but that's another episode. Maybe we'll do a Father's Day father wound episode. Anyway, growing up without parents as a kid, I was always looking for approval. My entire concept of self was based on pleasing others because I so desperately wanted to be good. I thought that the reason I didn't have parents was because I wasn't good enough, because I did something wrong. And that's a very common trauma response for those of us with complex PTSD, where we blame ourselves for our experience because it's too painful to blame the adults in charge. And as children, we can't conceptualize that the adults are wrong because, well, they're adults and they're supposed to be like these all-knowing beings. They have to be, because we can't provide for ourselves. We need them. So that absence really left my guidance bucket of the mother wound depleted, because the guidance I was giving myself growing up was to learn how to be adaptable, to learn how to mask and smile and people please and suppress my truth out of safety. And I absolutely think that this is significantly linked to me not feeling comfortable coming out until later in life, because coming out was a threat to this bubble I put myself in. Coming out would mean more people wouldn't like or accept me. So why would I do that when it was never modeled to me that the most important thing was to love and accept yourself? So as queer people who have been abandoned by our parents for our identity, the mother wound hits hard. It's the difference between conditional and unconditional love. There's so much grief to process when we recognize the love we received from family was conditional. Because I often feel like the love I had for them, it wasn't conditional love. I loved them so unconditionally, so much so that I hid parts of myself to not hurt them. And maybe that's one way to look at it. That if unconditionally loving someone else requires us to conditionally love ourselves, red flag, like massive red flag. Put some serious boundaries up and rethink that relationship. The self-esteem issues and the pain that comes from being a queer person who isn't accepted by their family, it's devastating. We're told family will always have your back, and then they don't. And so what's the first step then in healing a mother wound? It's grieving. And I have to say, there's been times that I felt angry that I have to do this work. Because the truth is, no one deserves to feel unloved or be unloved by their parent or family. No one. And that's okay. That's a part of the grief. Anger is often our greatest guide to shed light on the injustices that we faced. So we grieve, and then it's time to reparent ourselves. And for me, that reparenting process has really went hand in hand with embracing my mother archetype. In fact, I feel like starting reparenting work is likely an indicator that you're entering into the mother phase of your own life. But there's this in-between time that I don't think gets talked about enough, the space between the mother and the maiden, where you've got one foot in the maiden and one foot in the mother. And I feel like that's where I'm at some days. I think coming out later in life resulted in almost an extended maiden phase for me. Remember, the maiden aspect of the triple goddess, it's about self-discovery and learning who we are. And this makes sense because when we run from who we are, when we suppress it, it's not like it's going anywhere. It just becomes the elephant in the room. And I do feel like I'm straddling both archetypes some days because I do have to go back certain days and free parts of myself. And as I'm saying this out loud, I feel like it really speaks to the fluidity of these three parts or these three phases, because it's like by embracing my mother archetype and committing to reparenting myself, my inner mother has given me the guidance to explore unhealed or untouched parts of my maiden archetype. So then they work together and they become integrated. So if the maiden is self-discovery, the mother is the embodiment of that. Since getting married in March, I feel the mother archetype like knocking at my door because of these subconscious societal norms of like, oh, well, you're married, so now you're officially an adult and you should have it all together. And in a lot of ways, okay, it makes sense. I definitely have discovered who I am and feel pretty grounded in that. And I've built my own family. And then the mother piece is coming in and it's this invitation for really living. It's like, we worked through the maiden. We have this foundation. Now, what are you building? What are you creating with that? Full disclosure, some days the mother phase scares me. I did an oracle card pool last month and it blew me away. I was working with a goddess deck and I asked what goddess represented my unique energy and essence within each of the three phases of the triple goddess. The goddesses I received for the Maiden and the Crone, they made perfect sense. They were familiar energies to me, but when I tell you, I pulled Aphrodite for my mother card, and there was a brief moment where I was like, nope, I'm pulling another card. This is wrong. Why? Well, because Aphrodite is the goddess of love, of beauty, of pleasure, and if I'm being honest, that scares me. When I pulled Kali as the card most represented by my maiden energy, it made sense. I've been working with Kali for years. She's the goddess of rebirth, destruction. She wears skulls around her neck. So to go from the energy of a goddess wearing skulls around her neck, the skulls of her enemies, to the goddess of beauty and pleasure and lightness, yeah, that's a huge fucking leap. And yet, I know that's exactly what I need to embrace. That it's time to meet a new version of me. Time to enter into a new phase, into my mother archetype. And in this card pool, it all came together for me that the mother archetype that I felt disconnected from because of my own mother wound, well, of course, the lesson in this phase for me, it's going to be something unknown. It's going to be the pleasure and the lightness that I've disconnected myself from because of trauma. And with the help of Aphrodite, part of the remothering process for me is embracing lightness and viewing pleasure as medicine. It's giving my maiden, my inner wounded child, the prescription of play. Dr. Kang, who's a researcher and psychiatrist, says play is vital because without it, we have difficulty developing new ideas and concepts. We become perfectionists who can't make mistakes because we're uncomfortable with it. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give to our inner child who's been traumatized is the gift of play, and vice versa. When we never had the opportunity to play or to experience a lot of lightness and joy in our childhood, a gift our inner child can give us is the gift of curiosity and play and joy. And sometimes that takes more effort and it's more challenging because that's not what we're used to when we've been living in a constant state of fight, flight, freeze, fawn all our life. And I also think of the story of Persephone here. Demeter didn't want her going to the underworld to explore her shadow. But when we're embracing our mother archetype, we have to ensure we leave room for exploration. That's why Hecate, as the wise crone, she went into the underworld with her torch. She helped Persephone bring clarity to the darkness. She didn't insist she leave. So when we're reparenting and remothering ourselves, just something to think about. Giving ourselves the option for trial and error, giving ourselves the space to make a mistake, the space to learn and grow. And the language that we tell ourselves when we're reparenting is important. I'm the worst when it comes to reframing things and thinking positively. I get so stuck in negative loops, and I tend to live out worst case scenarios all the time in my head. But remember, the mother phase, it's all about creation. So I'm really trying to create new thought patterns in a very fake it till you make it way. So instead of worst case scenario, I'm trying to best case scenario it. And this is so critical for working with my mother wound and healing the maiden or inner child, because that part of me, that part, she needs the modeling. She needs to be retaught how to talk to herself. She deserves to be spoken to with kindness and gentleness and shown hope. And that's what I love about stepping into the mother phase of life, because we really do get the opportunity to reclaim our power, to create the life we want to live from a grounded place. And in this process, we get to give ourselves these absolutely healing gifts of nurturance, protection, and guidance that maybe we didn't get when we were growing up, but we can give them to ourselves now. I'm finding that a big piece of stepping into the mother archetype is self-mothering or self-parenting, and it can feel exciting and overwhelming simultaneously. If you're listening to this and you're like, shit, I don't know what my maiden needs. I don't know what my inner child needs. I've been stuck in survival mode. I'd encourage you to take an inventory of what you didn't have, what you didn't get, and start there. Or what you did get that hurt you. Maybe it was constant criticism every time you made a mistake. So that would mean you probably need to practice unconditional love with yourself, to change up the inner dialogue when you feel the perfectionism kicking in, to allow yourself to make a mistake and to feel the uncomfortable emotions and know that you can come out the other side. Change it up. Do the opposite, right? For me, when my friend told me that motherless daughters were meant to have a greater mother, this was so impactful, because looking at the great mother as my mother in this lifetime, I needed that in order to start reparenting myself. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've had these moments where I've just felt like I would give anything to feel the comfort of a mother, to know what it would feel like to have this unconditionally loving parent to come to my rescue. And learning to see the great mother as that for me, the mother goddess, whatever you want to call that was a game changer. Working on strengthening that relationship, it really taught me unconditional love. So if you're feeling some grief coming up or sadness with Mother's Day having just passed, know that you have the great mother and this beautiful gift to embrace your mother archetype and to be the mother you always needed and you always deserved for yourself. So happy belated Mother's Day to all of us, because we're all mothering something or someone in one sense or another. And sending such an abundance of love to you all. I'll see you next week.